immersing vessels, lesser known from the laws of Kashrut, but nonetheless, it's on the law books. Some people say it's biblical law, most people say it's a rabbinic law. Could be depending what the item is made from. If perhaps only the metal vessels are d'oraita and the glass is a rabbinic addition. In any case, we've been seeing some of the laws, and we have to finish up today. And one of the first things that everybody talked about was the loophole. And that is that if the vessel doesn't belong to a Jew, it doesn't require tevilah, doesn't require immersion. And here I think we mentioned that sometimes that's very convenient, particularly when it comes to vessels which have electronics in them. Electronic vessels, if you put them in the mikveh, you'll ruin them. Chances are. It's amazing. When I was just upstairs now, in between classes, there was a discussion in the rabbi's room, and someone bought a new kumkum. What's a kumkum? A kettle for, like we have right over there. Right? You flick it on. When it boils up, it automatically turns off, and that's quite common in Israel. And they bought a new one for the staff room. And so what about tevilah? What about tevilat kelim? And the fellow said, well, you go and you give it to the non-Jewish worker. There's a non-Jewish worker in Machon Meir. He's been here for 30 years. I think his name is, I forget his name. Ali or Ahmad or one of those. Anyways, I'm not sure his name, but I'm not in the support staff, so I don't have much to do with him. So he gave it to him, and then it doesn't belong to a Jew, and you borrow it. He allows you use. You borrow it from him, and so you don't have to tovel it. The truth is, by a kumkum, a kettle, these electric kettles, I've heard different opinions. Some people say there's no real electronics in there. There's nothing digital. There's a circuit, and so you can tovel it in the mikvah, and then as long as you wait for a day, 2 days if you want to be really careful, it'll dry off, and then it'll be usable, and there won't be any problems. And I did that a couple times, and I might do that again whenever I buy a new one, but last time I did it, it stopped working. So I guess it's not foolproof, and I let it dry for a week, and it got ruined. So if possible, we try to do the mitzvah, but if we can't, there is this loophole that we can use, and that you don't own it. If you're not the owner, you don't have the obligation to immerse it in the mikvah. Some people say you can use this technique, and particularly on Shabbat. Right? You're at Shabbat, and you have a new vessel, and you realize, I forgot to take it to the mikvah. You're not allowed to put it in the mikvah on Shabbat. But you want to use it to serve your guests, you want to use it, so temporarily give it to a non-Jew. As long as after Shabbat you buy it back, or you get it from him back as a gift. You can give gifts on Shabbat. It's not ideal, but for the sake of a mitzvah, it may be allowed. And there's circumstances, basically, you're giving it to the non-Jew. You're not doing anything wrong by giving it to a non-Jew. You're borrowing it from him, and you can use it on Shabbat. Most people say don't do that forever. You could just do that, then you never have any laws of immersing vessels, because all your vessels will just belong to a non-Jew, and then basically that loophole could destroy the entire system.
How about your gifts, though? That's transferring ownership. If that was the case, and you're going to say...
So to a Jew, transferring ownership to a Jew is more problematic. Transferring ownership to a non-Jew is not such a big problem, halachically. So some people say that's what you should do for a Shabbat, for a limited time. And then after Shabbat, you'll get it back. And then you'll take it to the mikveh properly for the rest of your life. But for your entire life, so that's why the problem is with this urn. You're essentially, if you're doing that for your entire life, you'll be, And to have somebody else's things that you're using for your entire life, after a while, it becomes yours, sort of like by using it. So it's a little bit of an iffy loophole. But for electronics, which are going to get ruined, you really don't have another solution. There is other reasons, though, to be lenient. Some people say that electronic devices, usually they have to be plugged in. Even if they have batteries, they usually can plug them in as well. Now, if you have a machine, so first of all, it's a machine. It's not a vessel. We talked about pots, pans, cutlery. Those are vessels for eating. A machine, even though it comes in contact with food, and we say we should be careful about anything that comes in contact with food, it's not quite vessels for utensils for eating. It's a machine. And so therefore some people say, well, it's a machine, number one, that's one reason to be lenient. Number two is, it's plugged in.
You don't have to total an oven. Same thing with an urn. An urn cooks water.
Why? So there's all these reasons is I'm building the case for saying why you don't have to take your oven and put it into the mikveh. So this better be a good case. Otherwise it can be quite onerous putting your oven into the mikveh. First of all, of course we want to be lenient because it could get ruined and then you wouldn't be able to use these items. So number one, it's a machine, it's not really a vessel. Number two is that it's only used when it's plugged into the wall. Now, things that are connected to the ground are not considered to be vessels. So like you mentioned that you asked about the pipes of the mikveh, and I said if it's attached to the building, if it's built into the building, so then it's not considered a kli, it's not a vessel. And so some people say these machines primarily work when they're plugged in, and therefore they're not a vessel. So it takes it out of the status of vessel. That's number two. Number three, what was the third consideration? Let me see here. There was a third consideration that why you could be lenient. Other people say there's another solution, and that is that you could take it apart a little bit. Basically, take out a few screws. That has to be something that's significant. Basically, when you take something apart, like when you buy a machine and it says the warranty will be voided if you open this up right by yourself. If you're not one of our electricians does it. So if you do that, then you put it back together. Then it's a Jew. Basically, you've destroyed the utensil and you're putting it back together by a Jew. And so you don't have to do. If a Jew manufactures a vessel, he doesn't have to do tevila. It's for a non-Jewish vessel or something that's been manufactured by a non-Jew that has to be put into the mikvah. And so that's another solution. When you have difficult issues like electronic utensils that have electric things in there, things that might get ruined, you can use that solution as well. So those are the solutions. Now I'll take some questions. We'll go around the room. Okay, start with David. Go ahead.
That's a likely one to be used for Lamaisa. So how far do you have to take it apart? Is it a handle that has to come off? Do you have to break the surface?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. It has to be, right? It's hard to define. It has to be done something that's beyond what your layman does. Taking off a handle, that doesn't really invalidate the vessel from its use. It's something that anybody could do, one screw, no big deal.
Plug off and put a new plug on, you're probably
yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely something that's not every person can do. I mean, I can teach you in 10 minutes, but that's a little bit a higher level of expertise. Yeah, and it's definitely non-functional without it. So that's a clear, good example of something you can do. Although the plug is not really part of the machine. So, but it is an extension of the machine, so I think that you might get away with it with the plug. But usually you talk about dismantling the machine itself. And even that, though, if it's something that's going to invalidate the warranty, so then that's enough of a dismantling to be considered there's no word mantling, is there? There's only dismantling.
No.
There is a word mantling?
The mantle is to put something, to assemble a mantle is to mantle.
To mantle. Okay, to mantle. So mantling, if the mantling is done by a Jew, so then you're good. If it was dismantled, and then mantled by a Jew. So that's another solution.
What do
Another
you do?
question. We'll go
What do you
around.
do?
What do I do?
Yes, you buy,
It-
you buy
so-
like one of those big silver kumkums.
Yeah.
What do you do with your personal
That's a
solution?
meicham. There's two words. Kumkum is for the kettles, like that one, and meicham is a tall urn, which you use on Shabbat for like a lot of water at once. There's two words in Hebrew for them. A kumkum is a small one, the one that flips on and off usually, or one that you put. It's a kettle that you put on the fire and it whistles. Remember those old kind? I don't know if you ever saw them, but you maybe saw them in the movies, right? The kettle that's left on and starts to whistle. that's called a kumkum. And a meicham is the urn. Usually you use the word for the big ones. In any case, so now you can buy in the store special urns which have a hechsher on them. At Osher, many, many stores, and they make sure that the factory is owned by a Jew, and everything.
That's what the
So-
hologram is about.
That's what the hologram's for. It's a special kashrut on the fact that you don't have to put it in the mikveh. And usually they're so easy, so I buy those. And for the kumkum, so as I said, I've tried pretty much every method, including putting it in the mikveh and waiting for a day or two, and it sometimes works. Because they break every few years anyways. So sometimes I just use the other method. You can rely on the issue that it only works when it's plugged in, so it's not considered to be a vessel. And then I've also given my utensil to a non-Jewish worker, which I was in touch with. This goes back 30 years ago. His name was Eid. Eid. One Purim, I dressed up like Eid.
Eid?
Eid. It's an Islamic name, and he was a very central figure in our lives. He was in charge of I was in Kollel, and he was like doing all the fixing, and everybody knew Eid. And he always wore the same overalls, like he was a workman. And so one Purim, I asked him to borrow his stuff, and I dressed up like Eid. But this goes back a while. And I believe I gave him my electric device. I forget what it was, a toaster oven or whatever like that. But I will say, before I continue, I'll take more questions. And the oven is included. This is, I'm talking about the actual machine. But an oven has grates inside of it. You could take them out. You must take them out and put them in the mikvah. Whether it's a toaster oven or an oven, those, or the trays, those, there's no problem putting in the mikvah. You make a bracha and you put them in the mikvah. They're made from metal. You have to. There's no excuses for those. It's the electronic parts and of course a mixer. So a blender, right? You know what I'm talking about? So of course the machine, the motor, that's electronic. But the truth is, food never touches that part. It doesn't need to tovel it anyways. The problem is the bowl, the mixing bowl. Most mixing bowls don't have any electronics in it. So of course you have, and the heads, the blades of these machines, put them in the mikvah, make a bracha. Why not? They touch the food. It's true. It's not quite for serving food. Most people don't serve their food in a blender, but our custom is that if anything that touches food and it's for making food, which is served on the table, we also tovel. So those you have to tovel, just not the base. The base, I don't think you have to play any fancy footwear or even dismantle it, because it's really just the motor, the engine, which it's not itself a vessel. I'll go around the room. So you had a question, Micha?
Yes, because what you said about the machines, right? About the stock block with the electric, but they in the Netherlands are like a little mixer, right?
Yeah.
To chop up vegetables and to make your own sauce.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like a glass bowl.
Yeah.
And inside you put the knife.
Right.
But to make it activated, you have the top, and that is connected with the electric. But if you take the top, then you just have the bowl.
Right.
You have to.
If you can tovel the bowl, you should tovel. You should tovel the bowl, immerse the bowl in a mikvah. Yes. Yeah. Whatever doesn't have electronics, it's not going to get ruined. I don't see why not. Yeah. Okay.
So, Rose, two things. Again, just something you mentioned yesterday, I forgot what your answer was. So I have this combination. Well, it's not actually mine. There is within my possession.
Yes.
A combination, like it's a bottle opener and a can opener. It's made out of metal, and it has not been toilet, but it belongs to a goy.
Okay.
It just merely resides within my room, and it's used almost solely by
Right.
me.
I think we said in the first
If I were to
class.
step back from him, would I have to toilet it?
So I think we're lenient about bottle openers because they don't really touch the food. That's not really the major uses. Even if they touch it once in a while, it's not the end of the world. And a can opener, the same thing. The blades, they shouldn't really be touching the food. It's used as a knife for opening up the aluminum can. And we're going to get to aluminum cans in a minute.
That's a side question. My actual question is, if I have like a Mr. Coffee, the actual coffee maker doesn't need to be dipped, but the pot that it drips into
should be put in the mikveh. Sure. Yeah. Other questions, Amos?
And what about stone? If you have a machine which works with stones.
Stone is not obligated to tovel. Stone cutlery, stone dishes don't require immersion. Only metal or glass.
And when you have
and plastic is chumrah.
Yeah, and an espresso machine, you put those capsules in it.
Right. So that is the problem we've been discussing, because it's electric and it'll get ruined if you take an espresso machine and you put it.
Capsules.
I know the one that works with capsules. They all work with electricity. There's an espresso machine. I think what's it called, a makita, when you put on a high pressure coffee machine. It's a special pot that you put on the fire and it cooks. Yeah, for Turkish coffee, those kind of things. So those, you put them in the mikveh. It's not electric in those. There's no problem. But those electric coffee makers, you have to find the solution of giving it to a non-Jew and borrowing it from him, or dismantling it somehow and mantling it yourself, or a Jew should mantle it. Other than that, I don't know of any good solution because it'll get ruined otherwise. Another question? Any other questions so far? Let's go continue. There's two more halachot that I want to teach you. One is a very big loophole, which some rabbis don't like, but some rabbis condone it. And you'll find that many store owners and hotel owners, they say these are not, and the rabbis that are counseling them say that the dishes are not for serving food to people. This is part of my business. It's business, but like somebody who sells pots and pans, he doesn't have to tovel the dishes because he's not using them to eat. You have to tovel your dishes that you own in order to eat from them. The dishes that I own, I'm a hotel manager, I own them in order to serve others, not to eat with them. In other words, why do I serve others? To make money. It's a business. It's a business vessel. It's not a eating vessel. And some kosher supervisions allow that. They say if the owner of a restaurant doesn't have to tovel his dishes or his cutlery and whatever otherwise would have to be toveled, or his pots and pans. Other rabbis say, who are you kidding? No, or they say, it's for eating, not your own eating, but for his eating, but that might be justifiable for a store owner who's clearly selling the items and he's not going to be using them in the meantime. But you're using them for food, even though you're selling those services of serving others. And so the rabbis don't allow it. Most Kashrut organizations say if you want the restaurant to be kosher, got to take all your dishes, all your cutlery, whatever is to the mikvah. That's part of koshering making the institution kosher. Sorry?
If you get ceramic plates and stuff.
There's more reason to be lenient, but most cutlery is not ceramic. Most cutlery has to be not the cutlery.
How often does a restaurant like that have to replace their cutlery? Maybe they once every few months they count how much has been lost and broken. So
it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal, but it's an interesting halacha that you should know that there is this out clause, and you can rely on that after the fact. Meaning, in an not ideal situation, you're invited over to someone invites you to a restaurant. You don't know if they toveled their dishes or not. There's room to be lenient and say, I don't have to go check that they did all their dishes. Also, there's room to be lenient if you go over to someone's house. They keep kosher. Somehow you're willing to, you think that they're not going to be serving you anything non-kosher, but you're not sure that they were in Machon Meir the week of Adar Aleph, and they didn't learn about the laws that there's such a thing. They never read the pasuk properly, and they never understood that there's a mitzvah to immerse your vessels if they were made in China. And a lot of Jews don't know this. And so what's the story? So it's very clear that it doesn't make the food non-kosher. The food is still kosher. And there is a debate about how permissible it is to eat from such dishes. It's not ideal. In other words, if you're there and you're going to offend somebody by asking them, so then there's room to be lenient. You don't have to offend anybody. You're allowed. But if, let's say it's your mother.
Then you might really offend them.
Yes, you might really offend them, but it's going to be every week that you visit her and for your entire life. And that's not really a situation, if at all possible. Have a conversation one time and says, I trust your kashrut, I'm happy to eat your food, but you just let me, for 1 hour, take all of your cutlery and I'll put it in the mikveh and I'll bring it back. And that's ideally what should be done. If it's something that's a regular occurrence, you should try to create a solution. But if it's a one-off thing here and there, you don't have to start to, as long as you're convinced that the food is going to be kosher, you don't, for example, you're only being served, cold fruit and vegetables. It's nothing wrong. In Israel, that might be a problem because of Truma de Masrot. But if you're outside of Israel and you're just eating cold foods that are not processed in any way and that you can see that they're kosher, or you can see the packaging from where they came from, it has a kosher symbol on it. So there's nothing non-kosher about it. You can eat there, even though the vessels might not have been immersed in a mikveh. There's room to be lenient when it's going to offend somebody or if it's a one-off deal. But if it's something that's like a regular occurrence, you should find a way to not offend them, find a way to say, and if you do it, maybe you're not putting the onus on them to go to the mikveh. They don't even never heard of such a thing, they don't know what a mikveh is. Maybe in some circumstances, people learn about Judaism and their parents don't know about Judaism. So this is something I wanted to mention to you. Other than the restaurant heter, the other people's homes, it's not much of a heter. It's only, if you, not to offend somebody. If it's going to be a regular occurrence, you should find some solution. Yes, so Moshe?
So I know my questions are normally really stupid and irrelevant, but this is actually a very relevant question because my
I don't take those kinds.
Huh?
I don't take those kind. Oh, I like the irrelevant ones. They're more interesting.
Okay. Well, this is a very relevant question because my parents are non-religious.
Yeah.
Therefore, there could be concerns that in my parents' home,
yeah,
there could have been treif on the.
That's next week. Next week we're talking about how to kasher kelim. That's the second mitzvah of kashering the vessels.
What should one do in that circumstance?
Well, when you're going to kasher someone's kitchen, one of the parts of the process has to be putting them in the mikveh as well.
Yeah, I can't do that. What should one do in the circumstance to not offend my parents? Should I just?
Well, you can't eat non-kosher yourself.
No,
number one. Can't force them what to do, but you have to be careful and make sure that you don't eat non-kosher. And obviously, your parents know that you're in a yeshiva and you're taking the observance of these laws much more seriously than they are. And so you're going to have that conversation. And of course, these laws that we're going to be learning are going to be very, very practical. Sorry?
Just make sure to bring enough paper plates.
That's one solution, although it's bad for the environment. Might be good.
Or just do what I do, buy your own plates and put them and no one use them but yourself.
Right? Some people there's all sorts of solutions. But we're going to talk about that more. But when it comes to kashering the kitchen, you can't forget the law that we're learning about now, which is immersing the vessels in a mikveh. That's part of the process as well. For most homes that are not keeping kosher, they never heard of immersing the vessels in a mikveh either. If the vessels are made in Israel, that's okay. But if they're made in China, usually they need to be put into a mikveh. Okay, another question? Yeah, sorry, Ruvain, did you want to say something?
Along the lines of Moshe's question, what's the proper thing to do? Let's say the vessels that you cook with fire, are not kosher. They've got to go through a mikveh, right?
Irrelevant. You're mixing the two issues. One is kosher versus not kosher, and one is mikvah versus non-mikvah.
So what I'm getting at is, your mother wants to cook you some kosher chicken.
Yes. It has to be a kosher pot.
The pot has to be kosher.
And what we're learning today is that there's an extra requirement for that pot to be kosher, fully kosher. It also has to be made by a Jew, or if it's owned by a Jew, then you really shouldn't be using it unless it's been into the mikvah. It's an additional requirement. Now, if it's owned by a non-Jew, then there's no responsibility of putting it in a mikvah. A non-Jew can own dishes and can cook kosher food in them, and you can eat from them. Of course, there's issues of cooking, but we'll talk about that another time. But that's not a problem if it's not owned by a Jew.
You've answered my question.
Perfect.
Thank
Perfect.
you so much.
Perfect. Yes, last question. Dave.
We've talked about selling objects to non-Jews. What about the reverse selling? To
You could just
Jews?
give them to.
So let's say I'm starting a large hotel. I'm going to need 50,000 plates.
Yeah.
Can I go to the factory in China and say, could you sell me the factory for a day while you make the plates?
100%. That's what these urn makers that have the hechsher on it, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly how they do it. They make sure that the owner of the factory is a Jew, and then the distributor is a Jew, and then the entire supply chain, they do a good job of supervision that it's...
The whole supply chain? It's
Yeah, if at any point it's owned by a non-Jew, then it has required to be toveled before a Jew uses it, yes.
Even if it's sealed. So if you go...
Correct, there's nothing to do with kosher or not. This has to be ownership, yes.
No, but
Even if it's sealed. If it's owned by a non-Jew, then it has to be put into a mikvah before a Jew uses it.
so those holograms really are limited use because we don't know if somewhere in the supply chain
What
they
these
put the sticker
holograms...
on when it's made, but when we buy it at the store, we don't know what happened between when it was made and it reached the store.
It's true, but I believe I read it recently on one of those types of machines that I bought, these special kosher urns. It actually said in there the names of the factory where it was made, the rabbi who supervised that it was Jewish, and the distribution chain, all the way down to the actual store that's selling them. So I think that they try to do that as much as possible. Obviously, anybody could, without any supervision, decide to sell to a non-Jew, and you wouldn't know. But they do their best to make sure that throughout the entire chain, it's all owned by Jews. Yes?
All right, so if the factory workers are non-Jewish,
No problem.
no problem?
Ownership is what matters for this
As
law.
long
Yeah.
as the owner of the
Correct.
factory.
Correct. Yes. Okay, the last law that we touched upon in previous classes, but I want to go back to it properly, like I told you all that I would, is the law of disposables. Disposables are aluminum pans. Nowadays you can get aluminum pots too. That essentially, we call them disposable. They're made for one use. But some people, they're really special people in there. I won't call them cheap, but some people would call them cheap. Some people would call them frugal. And I say these disposable, they're good. I just wash them like regular dishes. I can use them again and again and again. So,
Just don't buy disposable dishes.
yeah, but they're cheaper. Well, nowadays they're not so much cheaper because they just raised, there's a tax in Israel. They just raised the price of disposable dishes in Israel. I don't think it's disgusting. I think maybe the way it was done was disgusting, but the actual concept is a good one. We need to protect the environment. From what I understand, we've all seen pictures of the oceans that are filled with plastics, and apparently the food we eat, the fish that we eat, there's problems. There's too much plastic in the world. In any case, be that as it may, they exist. People use them, and use them a lot, use them a little. That's a separate discussion. Do they need tevilat kelim? Do they have to be immersed in the mikvah? The simple answer is they do not. They're not considered to be vessels because they're designed for one-time use, to be disposable. That's not a vessel. A vessel is something which is designed for continuous use, for continued use. Of course, there's some exceptional people, as I said, and you can theoretically use them over and over and over and over again, and they're pretty strong, but because by nature it was designed for one-time use, it's not considered halachically a vessel. Even if it's made from metal, you don't have to put it in the mikvah. The question is, and it's already addressed in a previous class, is, and so this applies to, pickles, jars, metal preservatives that come in these metal cans. They're designed for single use. They're not considered to be a vessel. They don't have to put them in the mikvah. We talked about what if you, the Jew, at the end of this chain, you say, well, even this glass jar, there's nothing wrong with the glass jar. Why should I throw it out? I should reuse it over and over and over again. This is quite common, and that has a nice lid. Screws on very well. It's sealed tight, and I like to make my own pickles at home, right? So you just take some brine and you make a nice solution, and you put some cucumbers in, and you're using the jar over and over again. So it was sold to you just as a really disposable, but you're turning into a permanent vessel. So some people say you really shouldn't be doing that because you need to put it in the mikvah. Listen to this. This is cute. Some people say you can be lenient because who's turning it into a vessel?
Jew.
The Jew. Up until you made that decision, it was a disposable vessel. Disposables are not considered vessels. And even though if it's made out of metal or made out of glass, you don't have to disposables. Who turned it into a permanent vessel? That's you. When you're a Jew. So the Jew turned it into, the Jew manufactured this vessel, and so there's room to be lenient and say that you can reuse these metal, aluminum, pickle jars and these glass jars. Some people say it's best to put them in the mikvah, best to say without a bracha, because whenever you have a doubt in halacha whether bracha is required or not, whether it's an actual obligation, that would require a bracha. But if it's not obligated, then you shouldn't say a bracha. And we have this debate in my home. My wife likes when she gets a special, like a sort of a nicely designed glass jar to reuse it for pickling or for whatever. And I'm like, we should really put it in the mikvah. So we have all these jars that are lying around till we get to the mikvah. It's no big deal to put it in the mikvah. But, sometimes you don't do that every day. You don't go to the mikvah kalim every day. And so we have all these jars lying around because I try to be Machon Meir, even though I'm not going to say a bracha because of those opinions which say you're really not obligated to because you, the one who turned it into a permanent vessel. We've been Machon Meir, and so we have all these odds and ends of these glass jars which are not really usable until we put them in the mikvah. Anyways, okay, questions? David.
What about I'm thinking of canning. So I buy my set of my mason jars. The lids though have a bit of wax around the side. So if you've ever done canning, you heat up the food near boiling, you put the lid on while it's boiling hot to kill anything that's in it, so you don't get any contamination. There's wax on the lid, and so it sucks it down and you have a seal.
Amazing, never heard of that.
But if I take the lid and I put it in a mikvah, does the wax interfere with it getting
it does.
Or is the wax part of the lid and therefore exempt?
I don't think it's part of the lid, and therefore it interferes. So I don't know how you'd be able to put it in the mikvah.
So then how would
you have to use one of those other solutions of giving it to a non-Jew and borrowing it from him. I don't see any other way. Okay, yes, Justin.
All right, so I'm uncertain, but if you've ever bought liquid nitrogen, you usually rent the vessel.
I don't think I've ever bought. What do you use liquid nitrogen for? It sounds like a science experiment. Was it?
It just really makes things really cold, and it's not dangerous.
It's not dangerous?
Well,
No,
the chemical is not dangerous. Nitrogen itself is not dangerous. You're breathing 80% nitrogen right now.
I understand. So what is liquid nitrogen used for usually? Are you saying
I've used it to make food.
To make food. Okay. Okay, it's
So
just
if you're going to be, basically you have to rent the vessel that the liquid nitrogen comes in.
Yeah.
And one of the most common things you can do is you can dip bananas in it.
Uh-huh.
The banana comes out, and one of the side effects of having put the banana in the liquid nitrogen is now it's incredibly brittle, and you smash it with a hammer and put it on.
Cool. Very cool. So the nitrogen, no.
The vessel.
No, nitrogen is not food. It's the fuel. So only vessels which are used for food This is not used for food, it's used for fuel. And you're putting your food in the fuel, that's no problem. I don't know of any kashrut problem with liquid nitrogen, so sounds delicious. You'll have to invite me over sometime and give me some crushed banana, frozen bananas on top of something. Thank you. Other questions? Amos?
Yeah, I have a question that, if I understand it well, it's just if I bring the electronic, whatever it will be, which will, and I just collect it here, like I will just do something in Israel for it. That means it's finished the product. When I finish the product over here, it gives.
Doesn't have to be in Israel or outside of Israel. It's a question whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish.
Outside, and I mean
it doesn't matter. As long as a Jew dismantles it and mantles it, then the Jew is created the vessel, and so it doesn't require a mikvah immersing. Last halach, I'll just repeat again. We said the other day, there is room to be lenient. Other people are more machmir, but someone who converts, we don't find anywhere in the Torah an obligation that he has to immerse his vessels. And so, assuming his vessels don't have any non-kosher food on them, he doesn't have to tovel his dishes. The dishes get converted with the convert.
But his food would not be kosher because of Bishul Akum.
Could be. No. That's a rabbinic law, the Bishul Akum. Doesn't make that doesn't. In any case, we'll leave the issue of kosher or not kosher for another time. There's lots of things to consider. There's treifa and there's chaylev. Right? We've been learning all about the things till you define something as kosher. But assuming, as I said, assuming it's all kosher, then you don't have to worry about tevilat kelim, because the moment you immerse in the mikvah, all of your dishes get converted with you, and they become dishes owned by a Jew, and as if they were immersed together with you. It's a nice trick. Okay, we'll stop here. Zat Hashem. Next week we're going to start the laws of kashering a kitchen. Kashering a kitchen. How to kasher
Your cane opener that
dishes.
Kind of in my room, for whatever reason, I would like to purchase it from you for a sum equivalent to 1,000 Palestine pounds. Do you accept this deal?
Might be our